Welcome to those of you who have just joined us. We are going to get started right at 6 o'clock, so we have about 3 more minutes to go. We have just 1 more minute before we get started. We'll start right at 6 o'clock. All right, it's time to get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join the City of Kingston's online engagement session for Point Crescent Open Space. My name is Nancy Knight, and I'm a Communications Officer with the Communications and Public Engagement team, and I will be moderating this online engagement session. Behind the scenes tonight, we also have Heather Brown, who will be our technical producer that can help us with any issues that might come up during the session. Before we get started this evening and we introduce our speakers, I have a couple of housekeeping items to share. The first is that this session is live streamed to YouTube and recorded. So to protect your privacy, all participants have their video turned off and have been muted, and the chat functionality in Zoom is turned off. Next, we know that sometimes technology troubles can happen. There's a list of common challenges on Get Involved Kingston, including what to do if your audio or video aren't working. Please note that you're also able to adjust your view options so that you can see both the presentation and the members of the project team at the same time. If for some reason your internet connection goes down, you can call into the meeting at the number on the screen, so please write it down just in case. The number is 613-453-5818, and the webinar ID is 859-8608-7783. You can also follow live on YouTube where this meeting is closed captioned. We will do our best to help you with technical problems if they come up, but sometimes the easiest way to resolve issues is to log out of Zoom and to rejoin the meeting, and you can do that using the link that you received in your registration confirmation email. Today, we're going to provide a question and answer period following the presentation. So if you have a question at any point during this presentation, you can use the Q&A feature, but we will hold all of your questions until we reach that question period. The Q&A feature can be found on the bar at the bottom of the screen. So to ask a question, simply type into the question area. You're also welcome to raise your hand to ask a question during that Q&A. So to do this, please use the raise hand function that can be found by following these steps. So click on the Q&A and a pop-up will appear. There will be multiple options. Choose the raise hand function. If you've joined us by phone, you can press 9 to raise your hand. I'm going to be monitoring for raised hands, and I will acknowledge you and let you know when it's time for you to turn on your microphone so you can ask your question or make your comment. Please note that if we don't get to any of or all of the questions tonight, all of those questions and answers will be summarized by the project team and posted on the project page on Get Involved Kingston. We're also going to be opening a survey after this meeting where you can have another opportunity to share your feedback. So on the screen now, you can see our guidelines for participation. If you've joined us before at an engagement session, they probably look familiar to you. These guidelines for participation were developed as part of the city's public engagement framework and to make sure that we can really all join together and be respectful and open to ideas. So I'm going to leave this on the screen for about 30 seconds so you have an opportunity to read them. If you have any concerns about these guidelines for participation, please let me know by using that raise hand function. Okay, thank you. Seeing no objections to those guidelines for participation, we are going to proceed into this online engagement session following these guidelines. So I'm now going to pass this presentation over to Matt McCombs, who is the project engineer.
Thank you, Nancy. Good evening, all, and thank you for joining us for a presentation of planned improvements for the Point Crescent open space. I'm Matthew McCombs, a project engineer with Parks and Shoreline at the City of Kingston. I will be the city's project manager for this project. Presenting today is our lead design consultant for this project, Stu Seabrook, project manager and senior hydrotechnical engineer with Riggs Associates Limited. We are here today to summarize planned improvements to the open space, which will include measures to restore shoreline stability and improve waterfront access. Partial funding for these shoreline improvements is provided through Infrastructure Canada's Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund. In 2019, the City of Kingston was granted $9.8 million in funding from the federal government's DMAF program to address citywide shoreline erosion resulting from changing climate and extreme weather events. The goal of the DMAF suite of 18 projects is to protect critical infrastructure and the community's quality of life along the waterfront. The concepts you will see here are subject to capital budget approval. The proposed budget is approximately $200,000 and planned for approval in 2023. If the budget is approved, construction would begin next year in early summer. I'll now pass the presentation on to Stu to discuss our concepts to date.
Thank you, Matt. So I've prepared a relatively brief presentation here tonight. The section of shoreline is only about 10 meters long, so there's not a whole lot to talk about, but I did want to, to highlight some of the current site conditions, our considerations in the development of a shore protection scheme to date, and a preliminary concept that we are presently developing. To reiterate, this is city-owned open space. It's the shoreline section is about 10 meters long. The property itself is maybe 50 meters from Point Crescent to the shoreline. And our primary objective here is shoreline protection for the site that's appropriate for site exposure, constraints, and opportunities. Next slide, please. So this slide here presents an overview of some of the existing conditions at the site. Those of you who are local are probably well aware of what's been going on here. We have reviewed this shoreline on a few occasions over the last several years as part of the city's inventory of shoreline erosion issues. In the fall of 2017, we looked at this site. There had been some erosion of the bank beyond or above the gabion baskets on the southern portion of the property. Removal of the materials between the gabion baskets and the stone wall to the south. But the gabion baskets at that point in time were still in relatively good shape and geometrically square and so forth. By the fall of 2019, the erosion of the bank above the gabions had advanced, extended across the full width of the property. And there have been some more undermining of the baskets themselves. So we lost some material at the joining property to the north underneath the concrete wall. And there had been some progressive slumping of the gabion baskets. They still were, however, at that point in time in a relatively upright form and still providing some reasonable shoreline protection, except for perhaps overtopping. The current condition, there's been continued erosion of the bank above the gabions and further slumping of the baskets themselves. You can see what condition they're in right now in the upper right image. The midsection of the baskets remains high, but certainly they're falling off on the side. Some of the baskets are broken and gabions are spilling out, and they've lost some of their base and are falling over both frontwards and backwards. So this in turn has further reduced the effective height of the protection, and it exposes the bank beyond to increased erosion, especially at high water conditions. Next slide, please. This slide here really just basically shows the relationship of the open space property and the residential properties to either side, to the north and the south. On the upper image, we're looking back towards Point Crescent. There is a hedge line that runs along most of the property on both sides, north and south. The bottom images are looking to the south and to the north, respectively, left and right. The hedge line generally terminates near the top of the slope, and there are a couple of trees on the neighboring properties or on the property itself right at the top of the bank. And as you can see in these areas, you can see some of the erosion near the top of the bank as well. Next slide, please. So the basis for the design of any shoreline protection is largely driven by the local wave climate and by water levels. Required geometry and strength of shoreline protection materials will depend on the wave heights and the wave periods, and also on where the typical wave action, and in particular where wave breaking occurs along the slope of the shoreline itself. This site in particular is exposed to southwest fetches from Lake Ontario and can therefore be impacted by relatively large wave heights, especially under high water conditions. And under Kingston's predominant southwesterly conditions. So this is probably one of the more exposed sections of shoreline in the city of Kingston, as it's directly opposite the gap. Some protection is afforded by the Melville Shoal and other local shoals as the waves move through the gap between Amherst and Simcoe Wolf Island areas there. The largest waves will be broken down in the shallow water, although under high water condition, there's still at least a few meters depth over some of these shoals. And so larger waves can get through, certainly nothing like what we get on Lake Ontario, but still some reasonable wave action getting into the Kingston Basin area. We support our designs here with numerical modeling. We've completed some for this site here. The top right image indicates wave height contours as we're moving in towards the site. I don't know if you can see in the slide, but in general, we're getting wave heights a little in excess of 2 meters as we approach into the bay adjacent to the shoreline property here. We also look further as this wave action moves up the shoreline proper. The bottom image here represents a water surface elevation time series at an elevation that is basically at the upper limits of the current erosion extent, so around an elevation of 77.5. And you can see under a 100-year design storm condition, so a large wave condition on high water, that plot represents the water surface fluctuations that are still occurring that high up on the bank. So we still have a fair bit of wave action that we're dealing with, even beyond the gabion baskets at this point in time. Next slide, please. Water levels are also a significant influence in terms of shoreline design, as they affect the ability of the waves to reach the upper slope areas. Typical seasonal water level fluctuations involve elevated spring water level, typically in response to the Great Lakes Basin freshet. These water levels typically fall over the course of the summer. The upper left image here shows a representation of the summer of 2022. We started the spring or June around 75.2, and we fell consistently over the summer to August around 74.4. We're a little bit lower maybe this year than typical years, but this is a fairly reasonable representation of what happens on the Great Lakes on a typical year. So there's almost a meter fluctuation over the course of the summer. The relative influence of that water level you can see to some extent in the images shown here. Bottom left and central bottom there represent the north section of the shoreline in June and August of this year respectively. You can see in June the water levels up, lapping on the bottom of the gabion baskets and the concrete wall to the north. By August, we've receded and the waves are really generally breaking on the beach as they approach. Similarly, looking to the south on those images on the right. So the water level is a significant influence on where this wave action is impacting our shoreline. Next slide, please. Long-term water levels provide even a larger range of possible water level extremes. Historic extremes here are shown in the upper left image. You'll note in this image in the blue bubble 2017 and 2019. Those have now become the historic extremes for Lake Ontario. We're looking at elevations around 75.9 meters. And that elevation is only about 0.3 meters below the top of the gabion baskets in the central portion area there. So you can imagine that we get some good wave action over top of that gabion when the water level is this high. This water level typically floods over the lower concrete deck on the neighboring property to the north as well. The influence of such water levels on the wave action can be seen in the figures to the right. I'll spend a second here explaining these. The red line represents, red or burgundy, I guess, represents the significant wave height as we're moving offshore on the left, inshore on the right. The blue dash line represents water levels, and the black line is the bottom profile. The wave height numbers, values are represented on the right-hand axis, and elevations of the water level in bed on the left. Basically, there's really one main point in these plots, and it shows that when the water levels are high, as in the upper image there, we have a sustained wave height approaching the shoreline of around 1.5 meters. So that wave height would get right into the gabion basket area. As the water levels get down in the summer, we're still getting wave heights perhaps of 1 meter approaching the shoreline, the toe of the gabions. In much lower water levels, these waves would tend to break a little further offshore. So this influences our consideration in the shoreline design protection. Shoreline stabilization then would need to accommodate certainly the high water level conditions, as you can imagine. Next slide, please. When we're considering shoreline protection measures, there's certainly a wide range of alternatives that we would typically look at. They're generally dictated by the wave energy at the site. This image here shows the full range of potential solutions that one might consider in protecting a shoreline, ranging from vegetation only on the left, considered to be green or softer techniques, extending over to the right, much more hardened, even bulkhead, steel sheet pile potential shoreline protection measures where we have a significant hydraulic energy. We do have relatively large waves at this location, so we do require a hardened technique. Ideally, however, the approach that we would want to look at would provide for energy dissipation. This is certainly preferred where possible to reduce wave reflection. You can imagine that the adjacent shoreline properties, which are concrete walls, are already highly reflective. So we're looking for something that can be as dissipative as possible, but still provide the strength that is required to protect the shoreline. And typically the city would like to take advantages of shoreline areas for public opportunities where such opportunities are appropriate. Next slide, please. This slide here just gives a general indication of what some hardened armored shorelines might look like. We're not looking at steel sheet pile or anything like that. We are looking at a rock protection alternative. You can see there's variations here. We have some more vertical stacked block walls in the lower images. There's a sloping revetment in the upper left. Upper right is a local Kingston shot down by the Portsmouth Olympic Harbor. You can see there's a stacked block wall with some random rock in front of it. And in the lower right, that's also Kingston at Lake Ontario Park. And off in the distance on the left, you can see some randomly placed armor. And in the foreground is a stacked block shoreline on a concrete footing. So these are typical solutions that we might consider in a situation like this. Next slide, please. So based on the physical site considerations and the local coastal processes, the preliminary proposal for this site includes a stacked block revetment on a low concrete footing in the lower portions of the shoreline protection, with more random quarry stone transition areas on the upper slope adjacent to the residential properties. The stacked block and the concrete footing will permit us to get a tight fit against the adjacent shoreline structures so that we can make sure that we're protecting from wave action trying to get in between the structures, and we can get a tight abutment against those adjacent structures and help to protect them as well. The slab stone steps in the central portion of the revetment would permit access to the water's edge for the public. The random quarry stone placement that we're looking at in the upper slopes, and you can see that, I guess, just to the north and the south of the dark gray, you can see kind of a rocky hatch area, if you will, with some slope lines on it. So that random quarry stone placement would provide some integration into the local grades. Will also provide some limited opportunity for some naturalization efforts, get some plants in there, and it will focus the public on the central portion of the revetment structure itself. And there is also some potential for consideration of a future pathway and parkway bench in the central portion of this open space area. You can see on the right there a typical cross section of what this might look like, with the concrete footing and on the base there, providing us a good solid and flat base to build upon, reinstate the cobblestone beach that's in front of that there. There's some rough armor that would be left in place, placing some stacked blocks to get up to about high water level or a little bit above, and then beyond that, looking at this more random rock placement and opportunities to get some plantings involved as well. So that concludes what I had to speak about tonight, and I'll turn the presentation back over to Matt and Nancy. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much for your presentation. We are ready now to move into our question and answer session. So as a reminder, you're welcome to add your questions into that Q&A, and I will read them out loud for our team to answer. You're also welcome to raise your hand. I will be watching for this, and I'll acknowledge you and let you know when it's time to unmute and ask your question. Just to let you know again that if we don't get to all of the questions tonight, we will answer all of those questions on our Get Involved Kingston project page. And there's also going to be that opportunity for you to complete an online survey before November 24th to share any additional comments you might have. And that survey will be posted on the project page as well. All right, we can get started now. So we have our first question from Juliet. They have asked if this is a swimming area.
Thank you, Juliet. I think it wouldn't be designated as a swimming area. It would allow people to get onto the revetment and sort of as more of a sitting opportunity. Might be a little bit challenging to get into the water, given that some of that existing cobble that'll be there will remain in place. So it's not necessarily a swimming area, but offers an opportunity to get down to the water.
Thanks, Matt. The next question is from Leslie. They have asked, in terms of rock protection or revetment, where is the space for ease of human access? Will there be a railing?
Do you want that, Matt, or do you want me to speak to it a bit, or?
Feel free to speak to it first.
So I guess in terms of the access, it is considered an informal set of rock slab steps, if you will. It isn't a two code set of stairs with a railing. The primary intent, I guess, is shoreline protection at this location. The lower slabs in the central portion are to permit a little more safe access, I guess, if you will, for people who are trying to get down to the water, but it isn't a formal set of stairs. I'll let Matt add to that if he wishes.
Yes, there's currently no plans to install a railing. As part of that, it's more informal access, and again, primarily shoreline protection measures. Also, I can offer to help with Juliet's former question. Crerar Park offers the main waterfront access in this area for swimming.
All right, thank you. So the next is a comment from Janine. They've said, looks great. Glad there was no plan for a beach area or canoe launch, as this would bring unwanted vehicular traffic into an area where there is no parking. They have also have another comment here or question. Can we ensure that the plantings are the kind that don't require regular maintenance, such as mowing, so as to limit the groundwater erosion of the lawn, as this also leads to deterioration of the shoreline for longevity? Put that out to the speakers to comment.
I guess I'll start with that and let Matt finish up. Yeah, the intent within that revetment area would be something that is probably more of a woody plant with a good root structure. So it's not something that would need to be maintained regularly. We're looking for something that's still going to help to stabilize the shoreline within the revetment area. I presume there wouldn't be any lawnscape until we get up above any of that rock protection where there is already some maintenance occurring.
Thank you. The next question here is from Sherry. They have asked, what will the city call this space? A city park? Will it be advertised as a city park?
It will not be advertised as a city park. It will remain an open space.
Thanks, Matt. We have another comment here that it sounds very well thought out. So thank you for your comment. We'll just pause for a moment here to see if there are any more questions coming in. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions tonight, but I will just make note now that if you do think of a question or you have other comments that you would like to add, please visit our Get Involved Kingston project page where you can complete that survey before November 24th. And you'll also have an opportunity in an open-ended question to add any other comments or questions you might have. I do see a couple more questions came in. That is fantastic. The question from Connie that I will actually answer for you. Will this presentation be available later? Yes, it will. This presentation will be available on the City of Kingston YouTube page, and it's also going to be linked on that Get Involved project page. So you can view that at any time to go back through that presentation. The next question here is from Kim. They have asked, what is the projected start date and completion date?
Thank you, Kim. So the planned start of construction would be late next summer, and that will line up with the waterworks timing windows set out by MRF. So that starts on July 15th and ends October 1st, and we hope to be completed for construction in that time frame.
Thanks, Matt. We'll just pause again here to see if any more questions come through. Okay, we have a question from Wendy. They have asked, will residents who are adjacent to this property be consulted directly, or do they have to reach out to the city?
Thanks, Wendy. That's a great question. We're certainly interested in working with the local property owners to make sure that we're accommodating to their needs and making sure that we're tying things in properly and appropriately for them. So yes, please reach out to me. My email address is available if you're interested in coordinating with us.
Thanks, Matt. I am going to drop into the chat for everybody Matt's email address as well as the link to the Get Involved project page. So you can copy that down tonight. Matt's email address is also available on the project page. So if you do need to Google this after the meeting tonight, Get Involved Kingston, and then you will see Point Crescent Open Space right on the homepage and the contact information when you click through there. Giving it another second here. All right, so it's looking like there are no other questions tonight. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining in or participating. We're so happy you could make it to share your comments and ask your questions. Before we wrap up tonight, I would like to ask everybody to complete an evaluation poll just to let us know how we did tonight. And while you're completing that poll, I'll just go over a couple more items. The reporting back from this engagement summary or engagement session, excuse me, will be posted on Get Involved Kingston on that project page I've talked quite a bit about tonight. That will include all of the questions and comments from this evening, as well as that survey that will be open until November 24th. So if you have signed up to receive updates about this project, you will be notified when that engagement summary is live on the site. If you haven't signed up, please reach out to Matt and ask to be added to that list. Thank you again, everybody, for taking the time to join us. We'll leave that poll up for another second or two, and then we will end this meeting. All right, everybody, thank you so much. We hope you have a great night.